Welcome. You've given us quite a fascinating puzzle this time. A whole collection of sources exploring how our biology, our brains, and the way we learn and grow are all connected. It's like trying to understand the blueprint of how we become, well, us.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Our mission in this deep dive is basically to pull out the most crucial insights about this biologizing of thinking, development, and education. And our main map for this exploration, it's a really insightful 1998 paper from Educational Psychology Review by Brown and Bjorklund.
It really is quite remarkable how ahead of their time Brown and Bjorklund were. I mean, they recognized early on the powerful potential of bringing together neuroscience and our understanding of how we develop and learn.
Right.
What's particularly interesting, though, is their emphasis on needing strong theoretical frameworks to truly understand what all these biological findings actually mean for education. You can't just jump from brain scan to classroom practice.
Exactly. So our journey today will take us through that initial excitement, maybe overexcitement, about applying brain science directly to the classroom.
Then we'll put on some theoretical lenses specifically, evolutionary psychology and the developmental systems approach to see how they help us, well, interpret these biological discoveries.
Yeah. Give us some context.
After that, we'll look at some real-world examples, how our biology shapes our memory, which is fascinating, and the surprising links between mathematical and spatial reasoning, including this really intriguing connection to music education.
That one's always popular.
Yeah. And finally, we'll touch on a really important point of caution that comes up in the sources about, not overemphasizing early childhood based on this kind of research.
A very necessary caution, I think.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with memory.
Memory is a great place to begin. Neuroscience has revealed pretty clearly now that it's not like a single storage unit in your head. It's much more a collection of different systems operating in various brain regions.
Right.
The paper mentions Tolving's work, which identified 5 key memory systems. There's procedural memory that's like remembering how to ride a bike without even thinking about it. Automatic stuff.
Exactly. Then perceptual priming, which is that unconscious influence where seeing something once makes you recognize it faster later, even if you don't consciously remember seeing it. Then short-term or working memory, that mental scratch pad we use for holding information temporarily while we work with it.
Okay.
Semantic memory, that's our general knowledge about the world, like knowing Paris is the capital of France. Facts and concepts.
Got it.
And finally, episodic memory, our personal recollections of specific events and experiences, like what you had for breakfast this morning or your last birthday party.
Right. So definitely not just one big file cabinet in our heads. And this is where the evolutionary perspective gets really interesting, doesn't it?
It really does.
The 1987 work by Sherry and Schachter, also highlighted in our main source, suggests that natural selection has actually shaped these different memory systems to solve very specific problems our ancestors faced.
Exactly. This is where it gets really cool. Thinking about memory in terms of survival. Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how different memory abilities would have been absolutely critical for our ancestors. I mean, imagine needing to remember which berries were safe to eat.
Pretty crucial.
Definitely. Or how to track game, or even just remembering who in your social group was trustworthy and who wasn't. All these challenges would have put selective pressure on developing effective memory systems.
Makes sense.
Recognition memory, for instance, just the basic ability to know you've encountered something before is fundamental for pretty much all of these tasks.
Absolutely. As the paper mentions, thinking about Hamilton's idea of inclusive fitness, you need to remember who your relatives are for cooperation to even work.
Right.
You also need to remember who's helped you in the past and, maybe more importantly, who hasn't, right?
Exactly. The basis of reciprocal altruism.
And Nelson's idea about storytelling adding this social and cultural layer to memory in humans, it's also fascinating. It's how we pass down vital information, traditions, shared experiences across generations. It's not just about individual survival anymore.
Right, it becomes a group thing. And what's fascinating here is Sherry and Schachter's concept of functional incompatibility. They argue that if a memory system becomes highly specialized for one type of task, it might actually become less effective at another, completely different task.
Ah, okay.
This likely led, they argue, to the evolution of at least 2 distinct types of long-term memory. System I, which is more unconscious, implicit, handling habits, skills, and general knowledge, what they sort of lump together as procedural and semantic memory.
Okay, the automatic pilot stuff.
Yeah. And then System 2, which is conscious, explicit, and deals with specific events and personal experiences episodic memory.
The personal scrapbook.
Kind of. Think of it this way. System I is about extracting the consistent patterns from our experiences, the things that generally stay the same, the invariances. System 2 is all about remembering the unique details of particular moments, the variances.
That makes so much sense. Like remembering how to tie your shoes becomes totally automatic. That's system I, right? But recalling the specific time you learned to tie them, maybe who taught you, where you were sitting, that's system 2, packed with all those unique one-off details.
Exactly. And Sherry and Schachter suggest these two systems basically had to develop separately because they have fundamentally different jobs, dealing with consistency versus uniqueness.
And the neurobiological evidence strongly supports this separation, doesn't it?
It really does. The paper mentions the famous case of patient HM, whose brain surgery damaged his hippocampus. This severely impaired his ability to form new long-term memories of events at System 2.
Right. You couldn't remember new experiences.
But crucially, he could still learn new motor skills, like mirror drawing, which relies on System 1, procedural memory. He got better at it over time, even though he had no conscious recollection of ever doing the task before.
Wow.
And as the paper points out, drawing on Nelson and Bloom's work too, people with certain types of amnesia can often have perfectly intact working memory. They can hold a phone number in their head for a few seconds, but they struggle immensely to transfer new facts and experiences into that long-term explicit storage of System 2.
That distinction is so clear there. And then there's this idea of exaptations, which I think is a brilliant way to think about it.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
It's like taking an existing feature that evolved for one purpose and then sort of hijacking it, using it for something completely new.
Yeah.
So our memory systems didn't evolve specifically for remembering phone numbers or learning to drive a car.
Definitely not. Those didn't exist back then.
But those are skills we can learn because our existing memory architecture, which evolved for other reasons, can be adapted or exapted for these new functions.
Precisely. And this helps us understand how we can have both very specific, maybe innate leaning abilities, likely shaped by ancestral pressures, like remembering faces or spatial layouts, and also more general purpose abilities that we can apply to a huge range of modern tasks. It might even offer a clue, as the paper suggests, to that tricky problem of learning transfer. Why is it sometimes so hard to apply what you learned in one situation to a slightly different one? Perhaps the original function of the memory system isn't a perfect match for the new task, you know?
That's a really interesting angle. The paper also touches briefly on how neuroscience has contributed to the often heated discussion around repressed versus false memories, still a very relevant area.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating that techniques like PET scans, as shown in Schachter's work with colleagues back in '96, can actually reveal different patterns of brain activity when someone recalls a genuine memory compared to when they construct or falsely recall something.
Yes, that's a critical contribution, showing a potential biological basis for distinguishing true and false recall, at least under certain conditions. And the 1995 comparison by Schachter, Kagan, and Leichman is also particularly insightful.
The one comparing patients with frontal lobe damage in children.
That's the one. They found striking similarities in the types of memory distortions observed, things like source amnesia, remembering a fact, but having no idea where you learned it.
We've all done that.
Oh, definitely. And also confabulation, kind of unintentionally filling in memory gaps with plausible but incorrect details and false recognition, mistakenly thinking you've encountered something before.
Okay.
This suggests that the still developing frontal lobes in young children, which play a crucial role in monitoring, verifying, and organizing memories, might make them more susceptible to these kinds of errors, similar to patients whose frontal lobes are damaged.
That developmental angle is key. And the Tolving study from '94 showing different brain activity frontal versus posterior parts of the brain when people thought about personal experiences versus general knowledge like news events. That really highlights how easily we might misattribute the source of a memory, right?
Exactly.
Especially, you could imagine, in situations involving suggestive interviewing or leading questions. It underscores the fragility of source memory.
Definitely. It's a vital consideration.
Okay, let's shift gears now and dive into mathematical abilities and spatial temporal reasoning. It sounds like there are some equally fascinating biological and neurological links here, too.
Absolutely. Geary's distinction from '96 between biologically primary and biologically secondary mathematical abilities provides a really useful framework for thinking about this.
Okay, primary versus secondary. What's the difference?
He argues that primary abilities, things like understanding the basic concept of quantity, like more or less, which is numerosity.
Even babies seem to have some sense of that, right?
Exactly. And understanding order, ordinality, basic counting principles, and simple arithmetic, like adding and subtracting small numbers, these were likely favored by natural selection throughout our evolution. They're the kinds of foundational skills we tend to see across different cultures, and they seem to come relatively naturally to children without intense formal instruction.
Right. So these are the natural math skills, the ones that probably helped our ancestors figure out, how many predators were nearby or how to share food fairly.
Precisely. But then, most of what we actually teach in schools,
Yeah.
algebra, geometry, calculus, status, those are biologically secondary. They're cultural inventions built upon the primary abilities, but requiring significant, explicit instruction. They haven't been directly shaped by natural selection in the same way.
It's almost a relief to hear that struggling with calculus isn't necessarily a sign of some fundamental biological flaw. It's just unnatural in an evolutionary sense.
It is. It requires hijacking and repurposing those primary systems in complex ways. And Geary takes this evolutionary perspective further when he discusses potential sex differences, specifically in spatial abilities.
Ah, okay. This can be controversial territory.
It can be, and it's important to tread carefully. He proposes that the ancestral division of labor, where males, on average, might have more often taken on roles involving hunting and navigating over larger unfamiliar distances,
Right.
might have led, over evolutionary time, to slightly enhanced development, on average, of the neurocognitive systems supporting 3D spatial awareness and mental rotation in males.
Okay.
He then suggests these same spatial systems could potentially be adapted or co-opted for tackling those biologically secondary math skills, like geometry, or certain aspects of higher math that rely heavily on spatial visualization.
Hmm.
But importantly, Geary doesn't propose any inherent sex differences in those fundamental biologically primary mathematical abilities like numerosity or basic counting. Those seem universal.
That's a crucial distinction. It's a specific hypothesis about spatial skills possibly influencing later culturally developed math. Now, the connection to music. That's something I found particularly surprising in the source material.
Yeah, it catches people's attention.
It seems the underlying idea is that both mathematics and music rely quite heavily on what's called spatial temporal reasoning, the
Mhm.
ability to mentally visualize and manipulate objects and their relationships in both space and time, right?
That's the core idea, yes,
Mm.
which was really pushed forward by Lang and Shaw back in 1991. They proposed that the brain networks involved in processing spatial temporal information, thinking about how things move and fit together over time, are also highly engaged when we process music, with its complex patterns of rhythm, melody, and harmony unfolding moment by moment.
Okay, so there's a shared neural resource, maybe?
That was their hypothesis. They theorized that engaging in musical activities, particularly learning an instrument, could potentially strengthen these underlying neural pathways involved in spatial temporal reasoning, which then led Rusher and her colleagues to actually test this. Could listening to or learning music have a measurable impact on spatial abilities?
And their initial research with adults, the famous Mozart effect study, showing that short-term boost in performance on spatial temporal tasks right after listening to a Mozart sonata. That was pretty intriguing, though maybe overhyped later.
Definitely intriguing and definitely overhyped in the popular press. But then they took it a significant step further by looking at the potential longer-term effects of actual music instruction in young children.
Right, that seems much more relevant to education.
Exactly. The 1997 study by Rauscher and her team with preschool children is particularly compelling, I think. They compared different groups over several months. One group got weekly keyboard lessons, another got singing lessons, a third got computer lessons focusing on pre-reading skills, and a control group got no special lessons.
Okay, so a well-controlled comparison.
Yeah. And interestingly, the early group that showed significant improvements, specifically in spatial temporal reasoning, measured by the object assembly task from the WPPSIR intelligence scale, which involves putting puzzle pieces together to make a whole, was the keyboard lesson group.
Wow, just the keyboard
It's
group.
just the keyboard group. Even more specifically, there were no significant changes in spatial recognition memory, like remembering where an object was located, in any of the groups. This suggests the effect wasn't just a general cognitive boost, but something more targeted towards that ability to mentally manipulate shapes in space and time.
That's fascinating. So it wasn't just making them smarter overall, but improving a specific skill linked to the keyboard training. And then the Gardner study in '96 looked at a more direct link to actual academic performance, right?
That's right. They studied first-grade children participating in a special, integrated music and arts program compared to a control group receiving the standard curriculum. They found that the children in the arts program actually performed significantly better in math on the standardized Metropolitan Achievement Test by the end of the school year.
And didn't they start out slightly lower?
They did. They actually scored slightly lower on that same math test at the beginning of the year, but they overtook the control group by the end.
That's pretty strong evidence.
It really is. Taken together, this line of research, which really stemmed directly from these developmental neuroscience ideas about shared neural processing for music and spatial tasks, provides quite compelling evidence for a tangible link between certain types of music education and the development of both spatial abilities and early mathematical skills. It really underscores how interconnected different areas of cognition can be, sometimes in surprising ways.
Okay, so we've seen the exciting potential, the promise of bringing biology and neuroscience into our understanding of memory and cognitive abilities like math and spatial reasoning. But the paper, our main source, also raises a really important flag, a point of caution, particularly regarding how we interpret this for early education.
Yes, and this is a crucial counterpoint to consider, especially given the hype that often surrounds brain research. The authors, Brown and Bjorklund, express a significant concern that the intense focus on early brain development, all the talk about synapses forming in infancy, might lead to an overemphasis on infancy and the preschool years.
Right, like those first few years are the only thing that matters.
Exactly. And that this focus could come at the expense of understanding the ongoing importance of learning and development throughout all of childhood and adolescence. They remind us of the earlier cycle with the early enrichment programs back in the 1960s, like Head Start. There was initial huge enthusiasm based on the idea of overcoming early deprivation. But then came the gradual realization that intelligence isn't some fixed quantity established solely in the early years. It's something that needs ongoing nurturing, stimulation, and cultivation across the lifespan.
It's that seductive idea that more stimulation earlier is always better, which the paper rightly suggests can be a harmful oversimplification of what we actually know about brain development. The brain needs the right stimulation at the right time.
Precisely. And they bring up Bjorklund's own work, highlighting the potential downsides of pushing developmentally inappropriate information or skills onto very young children. Their cognitive systems might simply not be ready, and trying to force it could even be counterproductive, leading to anxiety or turning them off learning.
David Elkin's concept of miseducation also comes to mind here, the harm that can be done when we rush children's learning, ignoring their natural developmental pace.
Absolutely. And the 1990 study by Heisenhirsch-Pasek and Rescorla provides some important empirical data to consider in this context. They compared pre-kindergarten programs with a strong academic-focused drills, worksheets, early reading instruction with more traditional, play-based, child-centered programs.
Okay, what did they find?
Well, they found that while the children in the heavily academic programs might show some small initial gains in very specific skills, like recognizing letters and numbers, these gains didn't necessarily translate into higher general intelligence or better overall academic skills by the end of kindergarten. The kids from the play-based programs caught up quickly.
Interesting. So the early academic push didn't have lasting benefits.
Not in terms of core academic skills or general intelligence. And perhaps more concerningly, the children who had been in the highly academic pre-K programs actually showed slightly higher levels of test anxiety later on, and they were rated as less creative by their kindergarten teachers compared to the children from the play-based programs.
Oof. So more formal, adult-directed instruction isn't always the best approach, especially when it's introduced too early and perhaps crowds out other important experiences like play.
That seems to be the implication. The key takeaway here, stressed in the paper, is the critical importance of developmentally appropriate stimulation in early childhood. It means meeting children where they are, providing rich, engaging experiences that align with their current cognitive and emotional capabilities, rather than trying to force them into formal academic learning prematurely based on, perhaps, misinterpreted findings about early brain competence or plasticity.
Right. It's about quality, not just quantity or earliness. Exactly.
Okay.
It's about fostering healthy, well-rounded development. Social, emotional, cognitive, physical, not just trying to accelerate a child's academic progress beyond their natural readiness. The brain continues to develop, reorganize, and refine its abilities significantly throughout childhood and adolescence. Placing an undue, almost exclusive emphasis on the earliest years risks overlooking the crucial role of later educational experiences, peer interactions, and the child's own intrinsic motivation and pace of learning.
Well, this has been a truly deep dive. We've explored some fascinating ways biology and neuroscience are shedding light on how we learn and develop from those multiple memory systems shaped by evolution,
Yeah.
to the really surprising connection between music, spatial reasoning, and maybe even math. And we've also tackled that vital caution, that reality check about not overemphasizing early education at the expense of the bigger picture.
It really highlights that while understanding the biological underpinnings of cognition gives us a much richer, more detailed picture, it's definitely one we need to interpret thoughtfully, carefully, and always with ongoing research in mind. It's not a simple instruction manual.
Agreed. What's particularly valuable, I think, about the perspective in this paper is seeing how these different fields, evolutionary psychology, developmental systems theory, cognitive neuroscience, can actually come together and inform each other.
Right, it's not just one field having all the answers.
No, definitely not. Together, they offer a more comprehensive, multi-layered understanding of the learning process. We move beyond simply describing behavior to exploring the underlying biological mechanisms, their likely evolutionary origins, and how they unfold within a specific developmental and cultural context.
So, for you, our listener, maybe consider this as we wrap up. How might these biologically informed perspectives on learning and development, thinking about evolved predispositions, brain development, the limits of early intervention, how might they reshape your own understanding of education? Whether that's your own lifelong journey of acquiring knowledge or how we think about supporting the learning of others, children, or adults.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
It is. Hopefully, this deep dive has sparked some further curiosity, maybe some questions, and encourages further exploration into these truly fascinating and complex topics. Thanks so much for joining us.